In this video, we'll be talking about different types of statistical studies. So once you've decided that you have a statistical question and that you have a parameter of interest, you need to choose a way to measure your parameter of interest. And there are three different types of studies that you can do to answer your statistical question and to measure your parameter of interest. The first one is a sample survey. In a sample survey, you're just asking people a question. So you would use a sample survey if you want to know how people feel, what their preferences are, what they own, what their salary is. Anytime that you could just ask someone a question and get your answer, a sample survey is a pretty good option. The next type of study is an observational study. So in an observational study, the researcher or you as the researcher is just going to observe the behavior of the participants or the individuals. You're not going to try to change or influence what they're doing, and you're really just not going to interact with them at all. You're just going to observe what's happening. The third type of study is an experiment. So in an experiment, you as the researcher are manipulating variables to figure out if there's a cause and effect situation going on. Usually with an experiment, you have what's called a control group, and then an experiment group. And the control group basically experiences no changes to their regular lives. And in the control group, there's some change or some activity that they're doing differently than what they were before. So let's go ahead and look at an example of these three types of studies. So one thing to be aware of is that often you can measure a parameter of interest using any of these three types of studies. You just want to choose one that's going to give you the kind of data that you want. So as we go through, we're going to describe a way that you could use each of these three studies to measure the same parameter of interest and be thinking about the maybe benefits and the downsides of using each of these types of studies. So in this example, we're going to imagine that you want to know whether a new diet plan is effective in helping people lose weight. You might choose any of the three methods to determine this. So if we're doing a sample survey, we would just basically sit down and ask a bunch of people that tried the diet plan if they lost weight. And we're just going to kind of do a survey of some people that did the diet plan. If you're doing an observational study, you would monitor your volunteers that try the diet plan and then measure how much weight they lost or gained. So here you're not really interacting or trying to change what the participants are doing, but you are going to observe, did they gain weight, did they lose weight, and how much. In an experimental study, you're going to take your whole group of participants and you're going to randomly assign them to two groups. The first group is the control group, and they're just going to eat normally. They're not going to do the diet. The other group is the experiment group, and they're going to eat according to the diet plan. Then at the end of the 2 months, the two groups can be compared, and you're going to see, you maybe might look at the average weight gain or loss of each group. You're just going to look at comparisons between and maybe differences between what happened with both of those groups. So as you may imagine, each of these different types of studies is going to give you an answer to your research question about whether this new diet plan is effective, but it's going to give you a different type of answer, and it's also maybe going to give you some of the different studies are maybe going to provide a more concrete or reliable answer. Let's do some practice just identifying what type of study is being used in each of these statistical experiences or situations. So in the first example, we are trying to determine whether drinking orange juice prevents colds. So researchers randomly assigned participants to a group that drank no orange juice or a group that drank 2 glasses of orange juice a day. Then they measured the number of colds that each group had over the course of the year and compared the results of the two groups. So this is an experiment. There's a couple of things that clue me in this is an experiment. First, we have this division of dividing our group into people that were going to drink orange juice and people that weren't. So we have a control group and an experiment group. The other thing that clues me in this is an experiment is that the researchers are affecting the actions of the participants. So they're saying, hey, you need to either not drink orange juice or you need to drink orange juice. And so that interaction between the researcher and the participants makes it an experiment. All right, example 2. To determine whether exercise reduces the number of headaches, researchers randomly selected a group of participants and recorded the number of hours each participant exercised and the number of headaches each participant experienced. So this is an observational study. So the reason this is an observational study is that the researchers are simply observing the participants to see how much they exercise and how many headaches they got. They're not asking the researchers any questions, and they're also about like their opinions or anything, and they're also not trying to affect how much the participants are exercising or not exercising. They're just kind of being a behind the scenes observer. All right, example 3. To determine the effectiveness of a new advertising campaign, a restaurant asked every 10th customer if they had seen the advertisement and if it had influenced their decision to visit the restaurant. So this is a sample survey. So the fact that this restaurant is simply asking their customers this question, had they seen the ad and did it affect if you came to this restaurant or not? That's asking kind of about a preference or an opinion and about an experience they had, right? Did you see it? Yes or no? And then did that affect in any way your desire to come to this restaurant? So those are opinions and preferences that could only be determined by asking the individual. All right, example 4. To determine if a new drug is an effective treatment for the flu, researchers randomly selected 2 groups of people that had the flu. One group was given a placebo, which is like a sugar pill that has no physical effect, and one group was given the new drug. Researchers measured the number of days that participants experienced flu symptoms and compared the 2 groups to see if they were different. This is going to be an experiment. It has the same 2 key features that we talked about in example 1. First, we have 2 groups, one that's undergoing no change and one that's undergoing a change of taking a new drug. And the other big clue in is that the researchers are affecting the actions and the lives of the participants. All right, example 5. To determine if higher speed limits caused more traffic fatalities, researchers compared the number of traffic deaths on randomly selected stretches of highway with 65-mile-an-hour speed limits to the number of traffic deaths on an equal number of randomly selected stretches of highway with 75-mile-an-hour speed limits. So this is an observational study. So basically the researchers are going to sit down and they're going to say, okay, how many people died on the 65-mile-an-hour highway and how many people died on the 75-mile-an-hour highway? And they're not obviously trying to cause or prevent anyone from dying on the highways. They're just trying to figure out, is there a correlation between the speed limit and the number of people that are dying? Whoops, did not mean to zoom in that much. So hopefully that practice was useful in seeing some of the important characteristics of experiments, observational studies, and sample surveys. What we're going to do now is talk about how we could design these 3 types of statistical studies to answer the same question. Okay, so the big question we're trying to answer is we have these 2 fictional soft drinks called Fizzy Pop and Coca-Cola, and we want to know which people prefer. So in example A, we are going to talk about how we could design a survey to investigate which soft drink people prefer, Fizzy Pop or Coca-Cola. So an easy thing to do would just be to ask a bunch of people. Now, as you ask people, you're going to want to consider, which people you're asking. Are you choosing a good sample? Are you using a good sampling method? Are you asking enough people to really get an accurate answer? But really, the core idea of a survey about this would just be asking people what they think. So let's move to B. Describe how you might use an observational study to investigate which soft drink people prefer. So if we're doing an observational study, it means that we're going to be observing people doing something, but we cannot, influence their actions or ask them their opinion. So I'll just describe 2 different ways you could do this. One is you could just sit by a vending machine or by a soda counter and just tally how many people order Fizzy Pop or Coca-Cola. Another way you might be able to do this is you could go to a popular place like an amusement park or a mall, and you could just kind of walk around and observe which people are drinking which kind of drink. So do you see more Fizzy Pops or do you see more Coca-Colas? So in both of these examples, you're going to want to make sure that you're thinking about things like, okay, if I'm going to an amusement park that's right next to the headquarters for Fizzy Pop, how is that going to affect what kind of drink people might be drinking at that amusement park? Or if I sit by a vending machine where the cookie colas are 10 cents cheaper than the Fizzy Pops, is that going to affect my results? Okay. So as you think about your observational studies, you need to make sure that you're observing people or individuals or actions that are actually going to be reflective of the population that you're studying. All right, let's look at example C here. Describe how you might use an experiment to investigate if consuming large quantities of Coca-Cola is associated with having headaches. So with an experiment, we want to have two groups. Remember, we want to have a control group, and then we want to have an experiment group. So one way to do this might be to say, okay, in my control group, no one's going to drink any Coca-Colas for a whole week or for a whole month, and you're going to count how many headaches you get. And then you're going to have another group that is in your experiment group, and you're going to say, okay, you got to drink 2 Coca-Colas every day for the whole month, and then you need to count how many headaches you have. And then after you're finished, you can compare and contrast, okay, was there a large difference between the number of headaches that each group experienced? As you design this experiment, and really as you design all of these different types of studies, you want to make sure that you are gathering accurate and real data. So one thing I really want to highlight here is that you want to make sure that you're thinking about the law of large numbers, which means that you need to observe or experiment with or survey a pretty large group of people in order for this to be reflective of your actual question. So like if you're doing your experiment and you put 2 people in the control group and 2 people in the experiment group, that's really not going to give you very much information, right? You're really not going to learn that much if you just have 4 people in your group. So you want to make sure that your groups or your population, your sample are big and that they actually reflect the population that you're looking at.